as well as some additional speakers, Debbie Carter from Clackmannanshire Council and Sonia Halliwell and Claire Burnham from Wigan Council as our presenters today. This afternoon's event follows on from our first workshop last week, which set the scene and provided context for community wealth building in Scotland. Week one touched on the theory and strategies that have helped to shape community wealth building approaches elsewhere, as well as practice through the sharing of examples of what has been working on the ground in the UK and also abroad. In addition to input from CLES today, as I say, we'll also be hearing from organisations that CLES has been supporting through pilot work in Clackmannanshire and also in Wigan, which is held as a prime example of what community wealth building can achieve. Reflecting on this, we'll also hear about what to include when action planning before taking a short break and then moving into a group exercise. I said last week that at a time when economic and social well-being has been worsened by the impact of COVID-19 and we all await the fallout from Brexit, a collective approach has never been more important to tackling long-standing issues of poverty and inequality in our communities. Community wealth building offers an exciting tool to garner the collective ideas, resources and skills of stakeholders to improve and transform economic and social well-being at local level. And for those of you who missed last week, I want to share again our aim in bringing these sessions to you all. We want not only to provide you with knowledge, skills and expert guidance on community wealth building, but also to link you to a community where you can build relationships and have conversations outside these events, so you have the support you need to take your ideas and aspirations forward. So to aid this process, recordings of all our community wealth building events, along with slides and chat box commentary, have been so far made available and will be made available to all of you attending today's event and as we move forward with future events. So again, just a few practical points before we start. As with all large-scale events we're running, we have muted participants except for those who are speaking, but you can add any comments or questions to the chat box. But we'd also like it, if possible, if we could get some conversation, real conversation going. So please make use of the hand signal, which we'll attempt, even though I think we may have many, many people in the room, but we'll attempt to manage and make sure we're keeping an eye on who's ready to ask a question. We're scheduled around 2 hours in for the workshop this afternoon, so we know that everyone's busy, and it's obviously my job to make sure we try and keep that time frame as best we can. So without further ado, can I now hand over to Neil to begin today's session? And again, lots of slides this afternoon, but you'll be given copies of those as we continue our events. Okay, Neil, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Liz, and delighted to be here again virtually with you all, and hopefully some of you returning, maybe some new people, so delighted. I'm Neil McInroy, Chief Executive of the Centre for Local Economic Strategies, and it's great to be partnering with EDAS on this work. I'll share my slides if I can. Let's see how we go here. I hope they're there. There we are. And hopefully you can see those. Can you see those?
Yes, we can. Yes, oh. Yes, we can.
Oh, thanks. One of those horrible moments, we have those moments a lot now, don't we? It's like, oh, everybody see it. Everybody can see it fine, and I can. Yes, that's great. So here we are, Community Wealth, for the second event, and the first time we talked about theory of community wealth building, where it came from, its genesis, if you like, a bit about the practice, talked about pillars. Today I'm going to give a little bit of recap because I'm conscious that some of you won't actually have attended the first one, but we're going to try and drill into action in this workshop more. So without further ado, I'll get going. Just to say a little bit, if I may, just about CLES, just to keep you all informed. We are a think and do tank with the National Organisation for Local Economies. We're working across the UK and Europe. I'm sitting here in Greater Manchester. We work by thinking and doing, and remember that's an important point about the actioning here, thinking and doing. When we get into the community wealth building, we think and do, and to achieve social justice and effective public services for everyone, everywhere. And we're 35 years old, we're a charity. So a wee recap, okay, a wee recap on what we got to the last time. Now, this is a similar slide from the last time. What is community wealth building? Well, it's a people-centred approach to local economic development, which looks to increase the flow of wealth back into local economies and places by giving more control to local people and businesses. Now, Many of you out there will be economic development heads. It's a maturing of economic development, if not a disruption of economic development, because it's kind of saying, how do we hotwire social, local economic, ecological benefits into all economic activity? And in this, we're familiar with the idea of redistribution. So this is basically the idea that says we pay our taxes, it goes to somewhere, and then it's redistributed to us in the form of public services and other welfare payments and so on. Now, there's nothing wrong with redistribution, of course. What community wealth building is saying, it goes an extra mile. It talks about pre-distribution. So thinking about our economies, our businesses, our activities, how we're making sure that the actual function of that economy is accruing social, local economic, cultural, and environmental benefits. It's hot wiring in these benefits into the economic production, if you like. And that is the new thing, I suppose, or the emphasis for community wealth building. Now, last week, we talked about wealth, capital assets, income and wages, and we boiled it down to this idea. The central question of community wealth building is, who has all the wealth? Where does it go? And how do we get more people that can benefit from that wealth? So it's a disruption of the flows of wealth to make sure that we all benefit, our communities benefit as much as possible. I don't know if I did say last week, but I'll say it now anyway. The word for economy comes from the Greek word oikonomos. Did I say this last week, Liz? I'm looking at it. No, I can't remember if I did. Oikonomos, keeper of the household, Greek word. And what we're saying about community wealth building is, let's bring the economy back home to our communities, our people, oikonomos. At the end of the day, economics is a social science. It's not a natural science. We can create an economy any way we wish. And in Scotland, there's a desire to create a well-being economy. And community wealth building sits as a practical focus of delivering well-being across Scotland, making the economy more social for us all. In a Scottish context, then, there's clear outcomes that fits into this idea of well-being economy and a practical means of delivering upon that. It's guided by our national performance framework, and it's seen that community wealth building is a mechanism to simplify some of the complexity of the ground of all the different policy streams that lands locally. How do we truly focus on jobs, enterprise mode, and give community a more direct stake in the economy by this focus on place and localities? In Scotland, there is now the first national government in the world to adopt community wealth building as part of a national ambition. The rollout has started in North Ayrshire, and that started in 2018-19. And now there's a process of action plans that we'll talk about today being delivered in Clackmannanshire, which is now, you'll hear from Debbie later on Clackmannanshire, Western Isles, which is about to begin, South of Scotland, which will begin in the new year, Tay Cities with a focus on Fife, which has begun, and Glasgow City region has begun also. The action plans will be delivered between November and March. And there's also, of course, speaking back to Scottish Government, how community wealth building is coordinated across a range of Scottish Government policy. Now, last week we talked about this too. 2 weeks ago we talked about this too. It's important to mention one of the key planks, facets of community wealth building is this focus on anchors. Anchor organisations. These are these large public, social and commercial organisations who, in flank, are not going anywhere. They are inert in some way. There's what we call in the business sticky capital. They are Clackmannanshire local authority is always, Clackmannanshire Council is always going to be in Clackmannanshire. Kilmarnock Football Club are always going to be in Kilmarnock. Forth Valley Health Board are always going to be in the Forth Valley. There's a sticky element to their to these organisations in terms of where they move and where they reside from. And of course, they are economic engines in themselves. They are economic agents because they buy things, they employ people, and they own lots of land and property. So they hold lots of wealth, and that wealth democratic wealth in public sector context, needs to be harnessed for community benefits as much as possible in terms of who they employ, what they buy, and what they do with their land and property assets. And of course, our own community planning partnerships are important in this regard as a fora for these range of local anchors. Now, we mentioned this last week too. This was about the pillars of community wealth. These are the 5 different facets of how we think about wealth. The first one is about plural ownership, you'll recall, and this refers to the extent to which we build an economy which has co-ops, community businesses, social enterprises, and so forth, rather than the large global corporates. Now, there's nothing against large global corporates that are driven by stakeholder value, nothing wrong with them. We need them in our economy. The point is that we want to increase the density and the range of this social forms of ownership within our economy, because we know the more of them that we have, the more likely that wealth will be retained within a locality. The second pillar is financial power, interested in how we ensure there's a financial ecosystem that supports local ingenuity, individual ingenuity and creativity and craft, as well as support local businesses. And we need to have a firm and secure financial system that supports that local activity. In that, credit unions, the role of pension funds, the role of growth deals, the role of community banks, the role of the Scottish National Investment Bank are important in that regard, that we truly have a pipeline, a flow of financial wealth to individuals, financial security, and for business growth. The third area is fair employment and just labour markets, very much in tandem with the fair work agenda in Scotland, to ensure that we're employing individuals on good terms and conditions, real living wage, good in work progression, and so forth, both across the public and the private and social sectors. Then we have purchasing, the spending power of our anchor organisations. This is about procurement and commissioning, ensuring that procurement and commission is infused with community benefits. So we're thinking about the wider social, local economic, cultural, ecological benefits that can come from what we purchase and what we commission. And finally, socially productive use of land and property, ensuring that our land and property genuinely accrues wealth for our communities, not just selling it off for financial gain, but actually thinking about different forms of ownership, different forms of how communities can benefit. This is just a way of carving up the community wealth building. So that's all a bit of a recap on last week. Now, I want to talk about the theory of change in terms of how we action community wealth building. Now, it's important, this is a bit theoretical, but it's important to get your head around, I feel, and I hope I can explain where we're coming from in terms of the epistemology, if you like, the theory of knowledge around community wealth building. What's this all about? How do we think about how change will occur? Well, what community wealth building seeks to do, it seeks to kind of break down some of the old shibboleths around how our economy and society is functioning and who it functions for. And it's an attempt, if you like, to disrupt some of those old things that might seem sensible, but are heading us down a wrong pathway. It's saying, hold on here, yeah. What you've been continually telling us is not the way to do it. We're going to disrupt the way we did it. So there's a disruption at the heart of community wealth building. It doesn't take things for granted. It says, hold on here. You're telling me you've always done procurement policy this way. You're telling me you've got community benefit clauses. You're telling me you're supporting suppliers. Show me exactly how that works in practice and if it does actually work. So there's a deep questioning at the heart of community wealth building that you'll hear from Debbie and Sonia later on. So the theory of change is disruptive. It questions those old shibboleths. The second thing to think about community wealth building is it's defined by its long-term goals. as I said earlier, it increases the flow of wealth back into local economies and places to give more control to local people and businesses. That's its long-term goal. Its long-term goal is a well-being economy, and work backwards from that aim to identify the conditions to achieve a long-term goal. Yeah. So this is not starting something and then realizing, hold on here, where are we actually going here? Yeah. It actually has a intensive focus on this flow of wealth. So it's a particular way of thinking about change. It's got this disruption of where we are, but it's also got this long-term goal, which is ambitious and works backwards of how do we start to get to that pathway we're heading. Now, another important, just to hammer home this point, is there's two schools of thought, or complementary schools of thought, around theory of change in economics. One is positive economics and one is normative economics. And community wealth building draws from both, but it comes from perhaps more of a normative economic position. So a change model that is positive would say, well, let's try and assess all the evidence. Let's try to have a scientific look at what's happening before we move forward. Let's get all the data we can. Let's get all the evidence. Let's sort everything out. And as we see all that evidence, we'll find the solution of where we go next. This deeply evidence, scientific, positive view of how you create change. Perfectly fine. Great. Community wealth building also, though, thinks about the subjective, the informed judgments about what an economy should be. So, in positive economics, you would say, well, we've got a fact here. 10% of the people in Scotland own 43% of all the wealth. Yeah, very useful piece of evidence. Normative economics said, wealth inequality is not good for economy and society. It makes a value type judgment. Yeah. And so we need both in community wealth building, but there's an erring towards these value subjective informed judgments. I hope you're following me. I wish I could see you all and you'll be nodding furiously or going like, looking bemused and go, what that guy on about? Positive economics reflects facts and studies of how the economy is performing. Normative economics thinks about prescriptions. How do we fix it? Let's not overly dwell on the facts. The facts are important, but they're a launch pad. What can we bloody well do? How do we fix that problem? It's actiony. It's saying, come on, let's make a prescription and sort it. Positive economics uses evidence base to predict what will happen with any changes. So it's like, we've got the evidence base. Now, if we turn that there, then that will happen and that will happen. It tries to, like a machinery, a machine idea of how we make changes. Normative economics says we offer recommendations for change in economic and policy. It says, okay, we've got this policy here. Why don't we change that policy and that'll maybe work better? Yeah, it's starting to work with what we've got. Positive economics says it's free of subjectivity. It tries to be neutral, dispassionate. It says, hold on, let's look at the whole picture here. Yeah, it tries to be subjective and neutral. Normative economics values subjectivity and the lived experience, the hard-nosed understanding of what it means to be poor and tully-buddy. What's that person really feeling? Yeah. We need both in this. I'm not saying one or the other. I'm just saying that community wealth building errs towards this normative economic position in part. Positive economics is more set in the context of institutions. You may be familiar with the term Overton window, which is the way of the world we look at, the window we look through, and the window's fixed. And so because we've got a fixed shape of window, we're always seeing the same sort of view, the Overton window. That is perhaps more of what's in positive economics. In normative economics, it's much more participatory. It's much more the actors involved. It's not rooted in the institutions. It's rooted in the people in those institutions. We're interested in what a health board will do, of course. It's very important to understand all the work of the health board. But I'm interested, or community wealth building should also be interested, who's the actors in that health board who gets this? who wants to do something, who wants to disrupt, who wants to really make a difference, who's wanting to really make the change. So there's this normative economics has this deep engagement with individuals, sentient individuals, subjectivity and lived experience. And together, the theory of change and community wealth building is together. We point out the world as it is. It describes the world as it is. It has facts, but only as a launch pad. So judgment can be passed, and we use that assessment to make opinion and to make the change. So we use positive economics as a launch pad, but we move fast to actually try to make the difference through this normative economic approach. That was probably a bit heavy. I hope you all got that. I'm looking at Liz. Liz is smiling. Maybe Liz has got it. Thumbs up. Now, what actually happens in the local authority? What actually happens in the action plan process before we go to Wigan and Clackmannanshire? So the normative judgment here is we need to redirect wealth back to communities and grow local multipliers. That's the judgment call. So what we actually do then is to think, well, what is the evidence? So in the action planning for community, well, what is the evidence? What's the basic social and economic indicators? What's the state of place here? And then we look across the different pillars. Where does the spend go? Who gets the money? Who owns the assets? What is a labour market like? Who gets the jobs? We ask those questions about in an evidential way, a positive economic sense. But then we don't dwell there. We use that as a launch pad. And then we say, hold on, now we know the broad picture. What's already being done? We start from where those individuals are, where those institutions are, where the policies are. What are the existing policies? And are they actually working effectively? A little bit of an evaluation. What needs to change or flex? And it moves rapidly to that, to what's already being done or doesn't work. What is in the way of these things delivering effectively? So it starts to get into it describes the car. I'm using a metaphor here, it might not work. We describe the car. Yeah, we're describing the car, and yeah, it's got a nice set of wheels and it's got a 2.0 engine and it, blah, 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 yeah. And then we say, well, let's just dig a bit deeper. How is it actually performing? It looks all right. How is it actually performing? You know, does it make a clanking noise when it goes at 60 miles an hour? You know, does it start to leak? Yeah. So I don't know, my metaphor didn't work, but you get my drift. It's to try and actually look at what is already being done and how it actually functions. And we also speak to a range of stakeholders. What are they saying about the pillars of community wealth building? What are they saying and what could be done better? And that's done through a range of interviews and workshops. But they're not the type of interview that, what would you say, very structured. They're semi-structured. They go down lines of inquiry. So if somebody says, well, we've got a brilliant procurement process and we've got a community benefits framework and everybody's signed up to it and it looks really good and it's really good. And you say, like, well, everybody's signed up to it. What do you mean by everybody? And they go, well, the chief executive is. Well, what about the commissioning departments? Oh, no, they're a bit tricky. Yeah. So you have this kind of line of inquiry that starts to inveigle, try to understand where the problems are, where the sticky bits are in those interviews. And most importantly, and it's the bottom, we're interested in the political priorities. What are the ambition for the local authority political leadership? Because ultimately, they have the vision for their locality. They have things that brought them into politics, things that they want to change. And sometimes that stands separate from the institution they may be heading. Political priorities, their judgment call on what they want for their citizens, their communities, is deeply important. Yeah, that needs to guide this action planning process and this community wealth building. What are they actually wanting? And we'll hear maybe that from Wigan and from Clackmannanshire. Right, I've rattled on there, probably far probably far too rushed. But I'm now going to stop sharing my screen. Have I stopped sharing my screen already?
Yes.
Great.
Yep.
Now, we're in good time. So if we want to take 5-10 minutes, Liz, I'm thinking.
Yeah, I'm just looking. Yeah, probably. Yeah, probably about 5 to 7 minutes would be ideal.
Yes.
I think that was really good, Neil. I think you know. I know you're saying you rattle through it, and I know it's difficult when you can't see people in a room and get that energy. But you know, it's very clear. You know, the importance of vision, aspiration, and leadership, and then complemented with the kind of tools and the core pillars and elements that actually give you the mechanism to make it happen. And then I think really importantly, your emphasis on having the people who are passionate about this process, kind of really engaging with the process and leading that process. So I think that's given us food for thought today. It's not just people at the top, or it's not just people kind of, who are on the grassroots level. It's got to be everybody kind of aligned. And as you say, the kind of sticking points. So I think that was really clear. I suppose I'm just wondering, do we have any questions? We can take them both in terms of the chat box, but also with the hands up. If anybody wants to indicate through the kind of the raised hand, if they want to clarify any points or raise any points so far. I'm not seeing anything. We have over 80 people, I think, in this room. Surely someone has something to say or reflect. No, I'm not, unless somebody's going to guide me here. I can't see anything.
This hand from Lorraine Thompson.
Okay, Lorraine, do you want to come in? Are you able to unmute yourself?
You're on mute, Lynn.
Yep.
You're on mute, Lynn.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, got you now. Yes, got you now.
I live in Nairn. We have a very diverse area. We want to really get into community wealth building. We have set up various teams, but unfortunately we are stuck in getting some sort of assistance from local government, NHS, etc. It's how do we move to the next stage? Because all of the things that you've actually said about the sticking points definitely ring tremendous bells for us. We know what we want to achieve. We have our various community councils, community planning partnership. We want to regenerate. We have employment various tasks in front of us, but we cannot get to the next stage because we cannot engage with the local authority.
Okay. Neil?
Lorraine, that's fortunate, and it's a common thing. I'm getting feedback actually.
So yeah. I'm going to
I'll fire on and just ignore it. And Lorraine, it's a common thing that happens, and I think the key thing to think about here is that, firstly, from the top, the Scottish Government are now committed to community wealth building. COSLA are increasingly aware of community wealth building. Public Health Scotland, NHS Scotland, and a range of other larger organisations are all aware. So you're pushing at a closed door at the moment, but I think that door will get more slightly ajar as we move forward. So keep on pushing. Secondly, I would, you've probably tried it, but directly engage with your elected the lead councillor, the leader of the council, and the chief executive. A little email saying Scotland's adopting community wealth building. Would love to see it in Nairn, or I'm not sure exactly what the council area is in Nairn, so apologize my ignorance. But just write a wee email and say community wealth building is happening in Scotland. It's part of the programme for government. What are we doing on it? That might be a way to kind of open the door. But I think keep on going, Lorraine. I think the door's going to be ajar, and keep that push and that activism going. And I think hopefully things will unlock for you. Hope that helps. Not much, really, probably.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Neil. Now, do we have any others? I can't see. Sorry, I'm relying on my technical support here because I can't see who's got a raised hand or who hasn't. So is there anyone else Elaine or Alison looking to come in? We do have a comment just in the chat box if people are following the chat box. We've got Dr. Sean Doolan, who's just saying it's more of an observation. Really good to see explicit theory of change in political economy stressed by Neil and Liz to lay out an approach that can be both validated and evaluated. That's important in securing buy-in to justify scaling up by Scottish Government and others. Okay, so thanks for that, Sean.
Not seeing any other raised hands at the moment, but there is now another question in there.
Okay, yep. So Sonia, who's one of our speakers today, but she's saying, Neil, what new opportunity does this year bring to community wealth building? I'm wondering, Sonia, are you meaning that in terms of, I'm just wondering about the context for that. You're talking about this year in particular because of COVID and the pandemic and the impact that that's having?
Yep. Yeah, Elizabeth, thank you. Yeah, so Neil, I know, as you say, CLES has been going for many years and really sponsoring community wealth building. But your reflections of this year and the potential impact on what that might mean for this agenda?
Yes, community wealth building is 20 years old, 12 years in the UK. And I think this last year, I think it is revealed to us all, even more, is how an economy is relational. What we buy, who we buy it from, where we work, who we work with. So community wealth building stands as a kind of practice to ensure that the economy is not just transactional. It's not just what we consume in a point-to-point transaction. An economy is a relational thing, and it relates to us as human social beings. And so I think that's helped community wealth building in terms of that people deeply understanding the economy and how we relate to it. It's also, I think, the mask has slipped a little bit on some of the tenuous and unresilient aspects we have in our economy. Look what happened with PPE and supply chains, and that look what happens to the fragility of capital investment flows in terms of our city centres. There's a fragility to our economy. We need to make it more resilient. And I think one of the ways of making it resilient is through community wealth building and ensuring we all have more of a genuine stake in that economy. So it's a tough time, and who knows, but I'm seeing across the world more interest in community wealth building as well as in Scotland. And maybe that's a testament to how it's offering something perhaps that the economy pre-COVID wasn't offering us.
Unmute myself, yep. Thanks, Neil. Thanks, Sonia, for that question. Okay, I'm mindful of time now. We're back on track. So I'm going to, can I introduce now Debbie Carter, who's an Economic Development Officer with Clackmannanshire Council, and who's been involved in managing the pilot community wealth building project that's taking place there. Debbie's going to share some insights into this experience, and I think probably bring what community wealth building is in reality to life for us. So not that you've not been doing that, Neil, but we've got a practical example here. So over to you, Debbie, and I think we're just setting up your slides now. I hope everybody can see that. I think we can.
Yeah.
Okay.
First of all, thank you, Liz, and everybody at EDAS for inviting me this afternoon. My presentation is fairly practical, I have to say. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the Clackmannanshire context and our experience of working with CLES, and sharing actually a few sort of hints and tips really for those who are, I know some of the local authorities who are just doing this work or just about to start working with CLES are around. So offering some hints and tips which I hope will be useful. All right, so in terms of the Clackmannanshire context, people may or may not know that Clackmannanshire Council is currently working with the Scottish Government on a wider wellbeing economy project. So this is based on really what Neil was talking about, I suppose, in a sense, there's positive economics. So we're working jointly through the Inclusive Growth Outcomes Framework process designed by Scottish Government. We're at the process, for those of you who know it, it's a 6-stage process. We've done stage 1, which was inclusive growth diagnostic. We've identified some themes we want to look at to to a deeper degree. And we've done quite a lot of work on consultation around that. The community wealth building is aligned to that project. So that project is very much taking that approach of saying, right, we need to look at all the evidence, we need to look at all the data, we need to learn what we can about this place. We then need to consult and find out what people think and what they think the solutions might be, and then test some of those. As part of that project, we will be working together to look at a range of levers to work out what levers we have that can drive change. And this is both at a local and national level. So the project, yes, it's running in Clackmannanshire, but the idea is that it helps inform Scottish Government around, you know, future policy making around this area of work. So there'll be a range of levers. So, and these include economic levers, and community wealth building is key amongst that. But we'll also be looking at things like social levers and environmental levers. So the wellbeing economy is a broad view of the economy. It links obviously to Scotland's National Performance Framework, which Neil has already talked about. So just to say that community wealth building is part of that, but it isn't going to be everything that we do. So community wealth building, I think for Scottish Government, it seemed a natural opportunity, as we were already established and already started working on the Wellbeing Economy project, when they started to work with other areas to develop community wealth building on the important work done through in North Ayrshire. Clackmannanshire was a kind of a natural place to start. So we started back in September on the planning, and it has all happened quite quickly. It's a very practical, very pragmatic process, which is really helpful, I have to say. So in terms of how we went through it, we provided a range of background information. It was quite interesting because it became apparent very quickly that that Neil and Grace Brown, who was working with him on this, had been very quick to trawl our website for all our strategies and policies. And so we provided a range of background information, so strategic information that talked about both the council strategy and the Clackmannanshire Alliance, which is our local community planning partnerships strategic objectives, and also looking at the city region deal, the Stirling and Clackmannanshire city region deal, and what we were hoping to achieve, still are hoping to achieve through that. We provided some economic information. The economic outcomes footprint report is really helpful part of this. It's a little out of date now, needs refreshing, but some of the areas that it looks at, particularly around where you employ people from. So those of you from local authorities will all have an economic outcomes footprint report for your local area, and also the Slade performance report, which is background economic data. In terms of procurement, we shared procurement strategy and our annual procurement reports. With human resources, it was our interim strategic workforce plan. And then for assets, this is an area that we struggled, I think, to provide sufficient background data. Our asset management plan doesn't really exist at the moment, but if you're doing this yourself, then absolutely you need to include that. Our strategic housing and investment plan, and also some information on our learning estate strategy. So it's quite a broad set of information. It takes a really broad approach to the council activity. In terms of interviews, there was quite a range of interviews. It's quite intensive individually. The council leader and the chief executive, all our strategic directors. We have 3 strategic directors, and they were all seen individually, the procurement manager and the chief finance officer. Those individual sessions are actually really important, I would say, particularly with the council leader. Our council leader, I think it would be fair to say that Neil was leaning on an open door with Clackmannanshire Council, that we've very much been working towards trying to change our local economy. The local economy doesn't work for a lot of our residents. It's not fair. We have one of the lowest jobs densities in Scotland. We have quite a lot in common with North Ayrshire in terms of our profile. We have Women and girls are particularly excluded. We have a dreadful gender pay gap, and we've been looking to change, and our policies have been working towards this. And I think our council leader could see immediately the practical application of community wealth building, and is very much behind it, as is the chief executive. In groups, because we're a small council, Neil was able to have a session with all our members. They didn't all attend, but there's 18 of them, so it's a relatively small group of people. But that was really important. We've had the report went to council last week, and we had an all-member briefing beforehand. And although you always get a little bit of politicking around these things, there's generally very, very strong cross-party support for this approach, which is really refreshing, and I think means that we're actually going to be able to deliver change with good, strong political support. Neil and Grace saw all the economic development officers. I say all, that's me and Jane, and our service manager. They saw the procurement matters group. Now, our procurement team is the procurement manager, so it's like a few things in Clackmannanshire. It's a team of one, and procurement is then taken forward by officers across the council. So the procurement matters group is those officers who deliver procurement activity across the council, and there's about 20 of them. They saw our sustainability team. They saw our estates and assets folk, who are people from across different parts of the council. They talked to human resources and staff in housing in particular, and planning, that are involved in regeneration. In terms of the wider groups, we had a very good session for potential anchor organisations, which included NHS Forth Valley. We invited the university. Unfortunately, they were unable to make it, likewise the college, which is interesting. The housing associations were very supportive, and actually our large private sector employers were supportive. We invited 5 and 3 of them came along, so that was really encouraging. We had a session for the third sector, which had our local TSI, some social enterprises, charities, development trusts and community councils, and also our business support partnership. This is a new group that started as a response to COVID, which has been a really positive thing. So we have 2 business improvement districts in Clackmannanshire. We have a tourism organisation called Discover Clackmannanshire. It's an employer-led group. Business Gateway, Visit Scotland, Scottish Enterprise, and the council are all on the business support partnership. In terms of tips, if you were, I would say this one might sound negative to close, which is not the intention at all. But really try to put as much work as you can into it yourselves. Do as much of the organisation, do as much of the rallying people around to come to the sessions as yourselves. I think we did a lot of that, and we got a lot. I think we got a lot out of that. We got really good attendance to sessions. I would say really use your chief executive and your leader to front the arrangements. So although it was me doing the legwork, the invitations all went out from the council leader or the chief executive. So when you're inviting senior people from other organisations, that gave it a certain amount of kudos. I have to say, community wealth building, I think probably a difference we had and that others will have going forward is we've probably had an easier job of it than North Ayrshire did, because community wealth building has grown in interest over those sort of couple of years since they started. So again, there was a lot of interest and a lot of support. Provide a written briefing as part of the invitation. Whilst those in economic development might have an understanding of community wealth building to a basic level or a more detailed level, a lot of the people that you're talking to, so people managing property and estates, people in housing, etc., may not be as familiar with it as others. I did a lot of work following up people that I wanted to attend but hadn't responded to invitations, and it was generally quite annoying in that respect, I think. But I think it really helped in the attendance we got. I would, because of me organising the team sessions for this, I ended up actually sitting in it, and it wasn't planned because I actually thought sometimes it might have been better, particularly when it was groups external to the council, that it might have been better to not to be part of that. I did opt out of the session that Neil had with the manager of our, with the chief officer of our local CTSI, just to give her sort of carte blanche. But actually sitting in has been proved really useful. So if you're the officer that's organising this, actually hearing the conversation is really valuable. And now that we've got the report, it enables me to have a bit of context sometimes as to where recommendations came from and what was actually said at the time. So that's been really helpful. It's good to offer a lot of support with factual information and content. I found during the interview processes, the discussion processes, people said things about not necessarily about the council, but just said things. An example would be that one of the recommendations is that the council look at using their empty properties, because there's a shortage of workshop space for small businesses. And there was a particular set of garages were mentioned in the report and were mentioned in the session, but actually they've got huge asbestos issues. So we were able to just sort of help feedback to the report, and maybe rather than make it a specific recommendation about that particular place, to be able to generalise that so that the action is still there. I would also suggest you really need to engage colleagues in commenting on the report. It's such a broad piece of work. It touches so much of what the council does that actually it's really important that everybody gets a chance to, everybody that came to the session, certainly within your own organisation, get a chance to comment on the report. And I think Neil and the council leader, particularly, they had a discussion about the draft report that was really helpful in shaping the actions that will achieve change for Clackmannanshire, but are things that are palatable and acceptable, and things that the council leader felt we could actually do something about and we could change. So for us, the report was published last week. It went to council last week. I'll just, if I can, take my presentation down so you can see me rather than hear me. Hopefully that's gone. Yeah, so the report was published last week. It has 21 recommendations in it across the piece. There are some really important initial priority recommendations. The whole thing has gone down really well, both with council and with partners. But for us, we're at the end of the beginning, I would say. We're just tipping the iceberg. There's a huge way to go. Not only just in terms of how we develop our anchor network, how we engage with partners, but it's about who's most appropriate to lead on everything. I think the council, it's a very small council. There are some quite, as with a lot of councils, there's some genuine issues around capacity, and being a small council, we have a lot of single points of failure and a lot of people who do multiple roles and are dragged in here, there and everywhere. One of the people working on our team for community wealth building is currently dealing with Brexit, so it's as well. There's some genuine challenges. So we need to sort out about how we resource this, how we work with partners to deliver some of this. But very happy to share the report. It's available on our website and I presume on the Clare's website, Neil. It isn't. Yes, maybe. Well, it's on our website anyway, but very happy to share that, and also very happy to share an update if anybody wishes it on the wellbeing economy update report that also went to council last week. So that's very practical, but I hope useful to folk in terms of how it went down in Clackmannanshire. Hard work. It was a hard process in terms of volume of work, but it worth every second.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Debbie. I think that's been really helpful and really brings to life, in a sense, the work that you've been doing with Neil and the team, just to get things moving and to make that change in approach. Now, I'm just looking at the chat, but I'm conscious of time, so I don't want to kind of dwell too much. I don't see any pressing questions. I think your details of the report, but certainly any information on community wellbeing has actually been shared by David Somerville, so thank you very much for that. Just before we move on, Debbie and maybe Neil, can I just ask a quick question just about, you know, how much do you think what you're doing in Clackmannanshire is creating a changing culture in the way that the council works? What's your sense of that so far?
Well, I've worked for council for 14 years now, and I would say this is the single biggest strategic, well, not biggest, but single most impactful piece of strategic work. To date, it's the first time I've seen the complete cross-party support, cross-party alignment on this. We have a minority SNP administration, and we have both Conservative and Labour groups and an independent councillor, and they're genuinely across the board very, very supportive. So I think it has huge potential. I think that brings a pressure, because I think there's you know, an expectation that both inside and outside the council that things are going to magically change. So we've been very careful to say when we talk to people, it's brilliant, but it isn't a magic wand. We don't have it doesn't help you grow a magic money tree that you can solve problems with. So there's a lot of work to do, but I think it's very significant. Certainly the language at the council meeting and from the members is that it's actually a sort of a step change opportunity for Clackmannanshire. And so there's a lot of pressure to make that work, which I very much welcome, because it's a place that needs that change.
Okay, and just one other point I wanted to pick up on. You talked about how there were real issues around women's and girls' exclusion in the area, and also the gender pay gap. Debbie, can I just ask, are you putting a specific focus on addressing that as part of the plans that you're taking forward? Have you got measures or indicators in place to kind of measure what the difference will be, is likely to be made through what you take forward?
Yeah, I mean, it's, as I say, we just had the action plan, so we haven't kind of developed those actions, but definitely women and girls are a key priority in both the council's strategic plan, corporate plan, and the local outcome improvement plan. The local outcome improvement plan is just about to be refreshed, and community wealth building and wellbeing economy will form part of that refresh. We have measures that we've developed through the wellbeing economy project, and we'll need to think about which of those we take forward. But yes, there's explicit. It's very much explicit, and I think the actions, although it was a strategic priority in the last LOIP, the practical actions weren't necessarily there strongly enough at last time round. But I think community wealth building gives us a really strong, positive, pragmatic approach to dealing with that, so it's very welcome.
Okay.
Just on that, Liz.
Yep.
If I may, and I think what's really important about the gender justice issue is, like other issues that become our political or institutional priorities of organisations, is the 5 pillars of the lens by which we seek to realise the issue of gender justice in terms of workforce, ownership, land and property ownership, spending, women-run businesses, women on boards. All that, I think, is a way of landing that aspiration, practical terms, through the 5 pillars, and fair wind in Clackmannanshire sales on that gender justice lens to its community wealth building approach.
Okay, great. Well, we're going to watch with interest how things evolve and develop in Clackmannanshire. So thank you very much, Debbie. That was great. I'd now like to introduce our Wigan Council colleagues. I'm really delighted to have you here from down south. And we have Sonia Halliwell, who's Director of Transformation, and Claire Burnham, who is Service Lead with Wigan Council. And they're going to present jointly on their shared experience of Wigan, obviously held up as a real good example, an excellent example of community wealth building in action. What I think is interesting, I'm not going to I don't have all the details of your work history, your biographies, sorry. But what is interesting, I think, is that, you know, you're both come from, well, Sonia, you come from an OD HR background, and Claire, you're a social worker by profession. So, you know, really interesting that it is about this cross-disciplinary, you know, cross-fertilization, if you like, of disciplines in public agencies, and you know, yet focusing on an economic agenda. So really keen to hear of your experience with those backgrounds in mind. So over to you. I think we're just going to set up your slides for you as well. So
that's brilliant. Thanks so much, Elizabeth. And the joys of working from home. I've got 2 cats and a dog, a new puppy. The window cleaner's just turned up, and I'm sure someone's going to bang on the door at any minute. So please bear with me.
I've just had a delivery as well, so I'm ignoring in the background. But
we're delighted to be here this afternoon, and it's brilliant to be doing a double act with my brilliant colleague Claire. As you say, we've got interesting backgrounds, but yeah, a little bit might come clear actually as we talk through the presentation, and a little bit our Wigan journey. And very rarely do people announce us as down south. And that's thrown me a little bit, Elizabeth, if I'm honest. But that's a lovely.
Oh, me too. I thought down south. No one's ever said that. We're northern, Elizabeth.
No, we were absolutely debating whether we needed subtitles actually for today's presentation.
Your self-identity there, but yeah, everything's relative.
Oh, that's great. So we'll hang fire for the slides, but while they're appearing, let me tell you a little bit about Wigan. Yeah, we're part of the Greater Manchester Group of Authorities. We have 345,000 residents. What other key facts do you really need to know about us, really? We're made up of 2 great towns. We've got a very strong industrial heritage that has both its pluses and its minuses. From an economy point of view, you'll have heard Neil describe some of the real challenges around community wealth building, and I suppose we are a perfect test bed for some of those challenges in terms of connecting our economy and our communities with the real opportunities within our borough. Our community wealth building journey this year has been incredibly interesting. We were just about to do a big launch actually of our community wealth building opportunities back in March. That was 2 days before the lockdown period, and yeah, lockdown happened. We didn't do that launch in March, and found ourselves thrown into responding to a pandemic, as many of you will, I'm sure, have been involved with yourselves. You know, living and breathing that over the course of the last year. Actually, that turned out as a blessing for us from a community wealth building point of view, because what it allowed us to do is to really galvanise, I suppose, the ambition. We'd initially sort of set off thinking we're going to really set some natural conditions down for the community wealth building agenda, and actually now there is absolutely no doubt of the commitment in the borough for this agenda and across our political leadership. It's tremendous actually, and it's propelling us forward. And the opportunity that Neil was describing in terms of the shifts in perception of our communities and our localities is absolutely something that we want to exploit and build on and create energy from it. So I'm just checking out because I'm waffling away, and I'm just checking.
No, I didn't want to interrupt you in full flow, but I think certainly from my end, what I'm seeing on the screen is the email with the slides attached, as opposed to the actual slideshow itself. So
we did a practice run and it was all set up, but as I've gone to share, it's technical hitches. It's not come up. 1 second. Apologies, everyone. I'll just try again. Claire, I've got the standby ready if you want me to just share it. Yeah, would you mind? Apologies for that. We did a test run, would you believe, and it was all there, but as I've gone back in, it seems to have disappeared. So I'll stop sharing my screen. Thank you so much.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much, Alison. That's brilliant. And you'll have seen there when Claire came on the screen, Claire's modelling our community wealth building background, team's background today, and I'm modelling the generic Wigan Council Be Kind, which is one of our latest behaviours. So that just explains our backgrounds a little bit. But Alison, would you mind flipping to the next slide for me, please? Oh, brilliant. Thank you so much. So A little bit of historical context as well. In response to austerity, Wigan went on a very different journey, I think, than lots of local authorities. We were significantly hit, the third fiscally hit in the UK in terms of our saving plans that we needed to achieve way back in 2010. And Wigan's approach to that was to think about how creative we could be and how we could transform in terms of organisationally to try and survive the significance of those savings. But what was born from that, and why I'm talking about that on this conversation, is there was a significant culture shift in the borough and in Wigan itself, and that born something called the Deal, which was a new contract, a different relationship with our residents and community, and for our workforce, a journey that really started with trying to work through what a different conversation meant with our communities and our residents about what part we were both playing in responding to the challenges that we had in the borough. We know our communities better than we've ever done before in the borough. We thought we knew them well back in March and the early part of this year. And through the pandemic, we know so much more now about our communities and what where their assets are, what they want from us in terms of the future. We've been keeping that conversation going through that different conversation. And what that provides is a tremendous richness in terms of the conversation and the opportunity that we can start to shift even further into a community wealth building era, if you like. So we're very much seeing community wealth building as our next evolution of our Wigan Deal. It's not a stop-start, it's a real natural progression. It feels really comfortable to be putting on that community wealth building jacket and talking to our communities about what community wealth building actually means for them. We've done lots of work across the borough in terms of creating teams, co-locating teams and working with our partner agencies. And I have to say that's been an amazing foundation on which to start to build this conversation around community wealth building. Both Claire and I'm sure Claire will testimony to this as well, we set off with that anchor launch session back in September, actually, after that postponement in March, wondering who would be part of that discussion. And every single anchor organisation came around the table, and it's been very much a passion and an energy and an ambition that's now shared across our health colleagues, GMP, our police colleagues, fire, our colleges, a voluntary sector and our third sector, all coming together to talk about what the opportunity is around community wealth building. We're at the point where we're already thinking about who else do we need to be part of that conversation and who can we have to come along and join this great view and ambition for the borough. The challenge is, of course, connecting and building that capacity. And I think the thing that resonated as I've heard Neil speak this afternoon and Elizabeth speak, and also Debbie, is this is a culture shift. This is about rewiring people to think differently, whatever part of the system you're working in, whether that's in the local authority, the community sector, whether you're in a partner, whether you're a GP or whether you're in a school, you could be a business manager in a school thinking about how to spend your budget. This is about rewiring the way we think and how we can do some of that rewiring for the benefit of the borough. In Wigan, we have a very strong culture that is underpinned by behaviours which are be accountable, be courageous, and be positive. And more recently, just before the pandemic, we introduced a new behaviour of be kind. And I have to say, them are lived and breathed by our workforce. We really, really have embedded those. And what that gives and what it creates is a great environment for people to feel they've got permission and freedom to redesign and innovate, because actually the great ideas will not happen potentially within an anchor meeting that we have. Those great ideas and those shifts in practice and thinking are going to happen throughout our organisation and at every level of our organisation and the other organisations that are part of this journey with us. Thank you, Alison. Would you mind just flipping to the next slide for me, please? Thank you. So we've put our top tips in slightly earlier than Debbie did with hers. And when Claire and I were thinking about what we were going to talk about this afternoon and what messages we sort of wanted to sort of underpin our discussion with, these were the things that we came up with. And what we wanted to do is to sort of pick up, if you like, more of the energy and the drive. Claire and I can get really giddy about community wealth building. You know, so absolutely, when Neil's talking through the principles of it, we're nodding and we're cheering from the sidelines in terms of what this might mean for our borough. But my top tip would be gather your political support. Really grab hold of it. Get those political players who are part of your team in your place to shout from the houses in terms of what this will mean in terms of the economy and the opportunity that it might bring. Look for your natural innovators within your organisation, your early adopters, those doers and those networks that you have, those network people who spread the word. You know, the type of people you could give a secret to and you know by the following day it'll have gone through the whole organisation. Those are the people you need in this conversation. This is about spreading the word, it's about creating energy, and it's about creating an excitement about community wealth building. And that's actually what we've done in Wigan initially. We've pulled together all those innovators, all those early adopters. It's not about grade, it's not about status, it's not about job title, it's about people who you can build momentum with and start to co-create a future plan. Now, to do that, my biggest recommendation would be to use your stories to create excitement and optimism, and then tell those stories relentlessly and build on the amazing assets that you've got and the pride that you've got within the place that you're working in. So we've got some brilliant stories emerging. We're collecting those case studies to be able to share, not just within our council, but with residents and within our anchor organisation. So a lovely little story, you know, the smallest little stories can help illustrate the benefit of community wealth building. We've got a great story of where our environmental directorate had previously been procuring the high-vis jackets from a Yorkshire business. And that's no disrespect to any Yorkshiremen or Yorkshire people that might be on the call, but we want them to be procuring those from a Wigan business, and that's exactly what they did. And amazingly, that Wigan business could then provide that product 70 pence less per unit than what they were paying. It saved them from collapse, and they're now going on to employ more local people, an apprentice, and just that wonderful example of that small business that people can see and relate to helps you start to illustrate how far you can go with your agenda and how you can create those little changes that make big life changes for people within your place. And then our final tip would be, before we get onto the practicalities of what that does this mean in practice, because Claire and I get all emotional and we're very much led with our hearts sometimes and not our heads. We have to be pulled back into the heads bits. Is, you know, be accountable, courageous and positive, but above all else, be kind in pursuit of the ambition. And as I've said, you know, what really this year has demonstrated to our communities is the resilience that we have got from our local businesses, from our local communities, has come from them. They have kept us operating and they have kept people with the basic necessities in life. And actually, the question I posed to Neil a little bit earlier about what has this meant, you know, in terms of the community wealth building agenda, I think we've seen that really inspire people. There is an opportunity now to grab hold of the changes in perception that our residents have. People want to look local, they want the public sector to be spending local, and they want to take care of those brilliant organisations and those businesses and those voluntary sector people and those social enterprise and potential cooperatives. They want to do that, they want to see that nurtured, and that's come over very loud and clear for us in Wigan. Thank you, Alison. Okay, so practicalities, getting down to brass tacks really in terms of what it's meant in terms of structure and process for us. So we do have a council structure in place and we've got an anchor partnership, as I've described a little earlier, which is excellent, and it's really coming together. It's still forming, you know, it's very much around building energy at this stage, and we had a fantastic discussion just a couple of weeks ago to say, come on now, we're all bought in, let's get into some real delivery now and some real planning. What are we going to do that's going to start to absolutely bring this agenda to life? That's going to deliver a procurement leads group and an employment skills group. These are common steps that affect all of us within the anchor partnership to start to again think of those ways we can do things. There's not many people can make procurement sexy, but that's what we're going to try and do in Wigan. We're going to try and re-energise that procurement and think of all them ways of getting around some of those systems to make sure that our local businesses benefit from them. Internally, we've got a community network group. Our political sponsorship comes to those sessions. They engage, they help us co-create, they enthuse people, they drive us, they challenge us. And I would give that as my biggest recommendation. Find that political sponsorship and it will drive you so far forward. Right, Claire, this is my point to hand over. Is that all right with you?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Sonia. Afternoon, everyone. So as Sonia said, I think we've been really lucky in Wigan as we've started to reflect on the journey we've been on, because for the last 5-6 years, we've been creating the conditions almost for community wealth building in terms of that cultural shift. We've got that great political buy-in, which, as we said, is really important. But by having that buy-in, it means that we've had permission to grow on organically too, which I think has really been important. So as Sonia said, we brought together that network group, and we didn't say we want directors of every directorate in the local authority. We said we want to actually bring people together who are energetic, enthusiastic, absolutely committed to the agenda. And it doesn't matter if you're a manager, a frontline worker or a director. We want collectively to kind of generate an enthusiasm. We didn't go with a preordained strategy or action plan. We just kind of pulled together that network and we said, right, what do we mean by community wealth building? Fran from Clares has been brilliant, you know, on the journey with us, kind of talking about the pillars, generating a bit of kind of structure and principles around what we wanted to achieve. And it was at that point we said, right, come on, we're going to have to do something now. We've talked about it. We've got the enthusiasm. How do we then create that enthusiasm into action? And that's when we said, right, what groups do we need? And we developed, as you can see on the slide, a HR and OD group, commissioning procurement, the adults and children's social care, housing and basic needs, and green economy. And I suppose the reason for doing that really was to put a little bit of structure in. Because, you know, Sonia and I often reflect and say it's a bit like boiling the ocean and community wealth building. You start a conversation and it threads out, there's so many opportunities. And sometimes you can be in that point where there's that many opportunities, you kind of freeze. So again, something that we've learned is then take a few bite-sized chunks to practically start to make a difference. And then kind of your bandwagon goes, people join, and then, you know, you can take it from there and you see some really good things coming from it. So again, you know, really good groups. We've kind of drawn in different people into those subgroups. And what struck us as well, and you'll find the same in your areas, I'm sure, is a lot of the work that we're already delivering. If you come at it and look at it from a different lens, i.e. community wealth building, we're actually doing a lot of this. But the power of looking at it from a community wealth building lens is that we can join things up that were in isolation. By joining it up, it gives you more opportunity. And so, you know, that's what we're finding as we're going through. If you could move on to the next one, please, Alison. Okay, so where are we now? So as we've already described, we've got a strong council structure in place in terms of, you know, kind of how we drive the agenda forward. But we're also mindful, we've got 4,500 staff who work for Wigan Council. And as Sonia said earlier, you know, they've been brilliant in terms of coming on that journey, in terms of that cultural shift. So the behaviours, that be positive, be courageous, you know, that permission to be innovative is there already. So we really want to engage those staff to get them to help us. You know, we see it as a movement in Wigan. It's not something we're going to do this year and then move on to something else. This is about getting that momentum, and who better as advocates than our 4,500 employees. So we have a structure in place in the council called Listening to Action, where each of our directorates speak to all of the staff, you know, every couple of months, and we've had a real focus on community wealth building. In addition to that, we just wanted to share kind of a nice little, again, story, a small example of bringing community wealth building to life. So obviously we know we're coming up to Christmas. As Sonia said, a lot of our local businesses have really been struggling, and we kind of wanted to give a bit of an opportunity to not order as much from Amazon, but like look at how we can support our local businesses at this point in time. So we said, why don't we do like a virtual Christmas market? So last week we invited 24 local businesses. We did it over 2 sessions to come and kind of have a slot on our markets, the pictures up there, and just share what they offer in terms of the business. The other flip side on it, why we wanted to do it, is obviously this time of year, our staff are used to getting together, you know, doing the Christmas do's, chippy lunches, all the rest of it, and we've not been able to do that. So we thought it'd be dead good to bring everyone together, but more importantly, it'd give our staff a flavour of what we mean when we say community wealth building. So obviously we're going into all the listening to actions, we're talking about the 5 pillars, what it means. But sometimes, especially for our kinesthetic learners out there, just practically having an example of what it means really helps, doesn't it? Because when you start to then talk about something else around community wealth, then they go, oh yeah, that was about buying local as well. Oh, do you remember the Christmas market? And it's kind of, I think, community wealth building, it's about kind of lighting a touch paper and seeing it kind of, run away. And I suppose the Christmas markets did that for us. It was such a small thing that as kind of we've lit a touch paper where we had so many lovely stories of the businesses that came on. Some people who had lost their jobs during COVID, some of the businesses reset up, so some really small businesses. Dead grateful, it was humbling for the opportunity to come. Staff were really positive. We've had lots of people buying from the local businesses, but the spin-off from it is we've now made a connection with 24 local businesses in the borough. And again, what can we do with those businesses? Because we know we've got them engaged now, and it's about how we then spread that out and engage other businesses. So what I'd say, and Fran from Claire's always told us this, sometimes it's the small things that can really turn into the big things. So don't kind of lose sight of that. We need to do the big strategy stuff as well, but the small things matter. So it'd just be nice to share that. You can see the picture up there. In terms of our anchor partnership, as Sonia said, we've got a good buy-in now from our anchor partners. We've had a few meetings, but again, it's about starting off organically, generating that enthusiasm and then getting some actions. So Sonia mentioned we're going to be in the new year setting up a procurement group and also a workforce group. We've also got permission to do some of the baselining information in terms of how their workforce is made up, how many people are local, what their supply chain spend looks like, etc. And again, great opportunity. So if you think of Wigan Council, we have done some kind of baselining, and we know that 40% of our supply chain is spent locally. We know that if we just up that by 10%, we would generate or keep in the borough millions more money for our local community and our local businesses. If you look at that times 10 in terms of our anchor partners, the opportunity there is massive. So just those connections and looking at things in a different way, procuring and commissioning in a different way can really generate more opportunities for local people. So, you can see again how that can spread. We're really passionate about engaging with young people. And again, we don't want this to be tokenistic. We really want young people along with us, shaping and designing what we do. So we've already been to our youth cabinet. We had a fantastic hour with them, dead challenging questions and conversations. People really bought into the agenda. What the young people from cabinet are going to do is help us to shape the comms out and that engagement with our broader young people within schools, etc. Young people listen to other young people. We kind of had a joke saying, I'd probably use Facebook for that, but Instagram's the way forward. So again, it's about how we engage people within this. So it's not looking like it's something the council's doing, but it's that we're doing together. And again, really strong links with the universities and colleges, which is really positive for us. So final slide. Please, Alison, thank you. So again, looking ahead, so we're looking at setting up a business consortium in the year. And again, we're adopting the same approach. So we've already got some businesses who are really supportive of the agenda. So we want to bring them together and with a blank piece of paper and get them to help us shape how we then engage with the broader business community, linking in with the social enterprises, the cooperatives, and again, getting them to help us shape that moving forward. We're also exploring setting up an entrepreneurial hub. I'm dead excited about this. So it might have to be virtual in the first instance, but if you imagine kind of an entrepreneurial hub, which engages young people, which it gets our current businesses in, those current businesses supporting our young people or other people to kind of get more engaged and actually think about the opportunities that are open to us. It was dead interesting when we talked to the young people. They said, I've never even thought about setting up my own business. It kind of wasn't even there. So how do we kind of inspire and raise that aspiration and opportunity? And we want to do that by providing an infrastructure of a hub that can really provide that support to businesses who are thinking about setting up. And thirdly, we're looking at developing a problem-solving kind of Dragon's Den approach. So again, from the Anchor Partnership, we've had lots of conversations about some of the problems that some of our Anchor partners have in terms of a kind of approach or something that they're wanting to deliver. And often you'll think, this is my problem, I'll go to what I always went to. So I have a big business over there that I procure, I'll just do that again and ask them if they can do this as well. We want people to think differently. So instead of just procuring one of our national companies for more, how do we think, actually, we'll take that problem into our business consortia, into the social enterprise group that we've got and say, actually, have you got a solution to this? So again, we're generating kind of that innovation and supporting our local businesses and, with those problems that we've got. And then finally, about that co-design with children and young people, we're dead passionate about that and having them really engaged right throughout. So it's not just a group that we go to every now and then, but we really get that working hand in hand with our young people to shape the future. And again, we've got really good buy-in around that. So I think that's the end of our presentation. I'm sorry, I think we may have run over slightly, so apologies. But if anyone's got any questions, Sonia and I would be happy to have a conversation with you.
No, don't worry. Honestly, Claire, Sonia, that was fantastic. And as I say, really brought this whole experience to life. And I think, just the energy that you and the enthusiasm and passion that you bring really shone through. I think, just picking up a couple of things that you said, I loved what you said about, rewiring the way that everyone thinks for the benefit of the borough. Love that. That's almost a strapline in itself. And also that small things matter. And that, you were talking about, you get very, it's very much about heart, but it's head and heart together, isn't it? It's about bringing those two elements together and about being kind in the process. The fact that people need to be inspired. And I suppose my take on that would be they also have to have hope, and what you're bringing is hope to the local. And that's really important. Also really liked what you were saying about the shifting of the spend, so because that's been a big factor in a lot of initiatives that have taken place in different policy areas in Scotland over many years now. But, just what would it take if you increased by a certain percentage investment? What difference does that make, and thinking that through? And it might not be massive. You were saying 10%. I know in some other initiatives up here, it's been a 2% shift and it's made a significant difference. So I am conscious there's a couple of questions in the chat box, but I think, Sonia, you've answered those. So if you don't mind, I won't open it up just now because I am conscious of time. I'm conscious that we do want to have a bit, even just a shorter break than we'd planned, so we can go on to the exercise. Neil, do you want to say anything just quickly about the steps of the action plan? Because that was the next item on the agenda before we move to a break, or will we just move to the break?
I think we should move to a break, actually, just 5 minutes perhaps, Liz.
Yep.
That would be best. Yeah. Okay,
well, but thanks very much, as I say, Claire, Sonia, everyone actually, for your really, we've run over, but it doesn't matter because those presentations were worth listening to. So thank you so much. Okay, so we'll take a break and we'll come back in, let's see, sorry, it's 25 past now. If everybody could come back for 5:30, that would be really helpful. Okay, the event, so.
Thank you, Liz. Well, I hope you're enjoying yourselves, folks, wherever you are. And we'll go a little bit longer for this exercise, but we'll shorten it by about 15 minutes or so. I just wanted to try and get you into the mindset of the types of questions we ask vis-a-vis community wealth building. And it's difficult because you're all from different organisations, some local authorities, some community, some business, some other types of organisations. So it's difficult to kind of arrange this, particularly in this sort of format, but I've got a little plan, and hopefully you got a PDF sent through. I think Alison sent through a PDF with some of the slides on it, and I will refer to them. So I'll give you 10 minutes, really quick introduction. 10 minutes you to do a bit of the exercise, and then we'll have a little 10 minutes catch up. How does that sound, Liz? Does that sound doable?
Yep, sounds good.
Good. Right, let me get the slides up. Oh, don't do it to me. Oh, here we go. You seen that?
Not yet, Neil.
Yeah.
Yeah, seeing it.
No.
No.
Blow. Come on, work.
Would you like us to share, Neil?
Seen that?
No, not yet.
Do
you want to do it, Elaine?
Microsoft Teams do that, don't they? It throws you out.
It's little gremlins, just to keep us on our toes.
Neil, I'm just glad it wasn't just me who couldn't get the thingy up. Thank you.
It throws you out.
Yeah.
I've got the slides ready for you, Neil, if that's helpful.
Brilliant. Alison, fire on.
I just don't know what one you want from, but I'll share just now.
It will be slide 15, I think.
This one?
Yes. Yeah. Next one. Thanks, Alison. Next one. Next one. Yeah, so what I'd like you to do, folks, is that there's many different pathways by which we can advance community wealth building practice. And you've already heard the action planning processes that we've undertaken in part fully in Clackmannanshire and a different sort of variant of that within Wigan. So what I've done here is to put together key questions across the pillars, which I want you to choose one of them for yourself. Yeah. Now, these questions, some are relating to you as an organisation. So if you're an organisation rather than a local authority, you could perhaps answer the green ones. And if you're a local authority, you could perhaps answer you can answer all of them. But given shortage of time, I just would like you to maybe answer one of the questions in each of the pillars, but choose one of the pillars each. So there's the workforce pillar, and there's a set of questions. Yeah, so if you want to choose workforce, you think that's a good one to choose, then do so. Thank you, Alison. The next one's land and property assets. There's some of the questions. These are questions that we'd ask as part of a community wealth building inquiry before we get on to the action and doing stuff. Yeah. Thanks, Alison. Next one. Finance. Again, there is the third pillar. And then you've got the green question, which is for if you're an organisation, and the green and the black, or if you're a local authority, thinking about the wider area, if you like. Next one, please, Alison. There's plural and democratic ownership. Again, some questions to ask yourselves of your place, and then spending procurement. So these are just a little exercise to get you into the mindset of how we think in community wealth building around those 5 pillars. Now, if none of you are from a particular large organisation or from a local authority, I also have some other questions for you. These are for the private sector or community sector. Next one, please, Alison. These are questions for you. If you come from the social sector, community volunteer sector, or commercial sector, if you can answer those questions. Now, you should have them in PDFs. We'll give you till 2:45, and I'm looking for some feedback on some of those questions from you. And if nobody volunteers, I might even pick on somebody. So you fire away for 10 minutes, answer one or more of the questions across those 5 pillars, and there's those special set of questions for if you're not an organisation as such, you're from the social sector or the commercial sector. I think the questions make sense, so please fire on and do as much as you can within 10 minutes. And I think it'll give you a little insight into the kind of questions we ask in community wealth building as part of any planning process. And also, it'll be good to share that when we all come back in 10 minutes. Okay, thank you. Thanks for that, Alison. If anybody needs any assistance, fire it into the chat and we'll endeavour to help.
Or you can also raise your hand and I'll keep an eye out.
Nice.
Yeah, are we still having some problems with people being able to access the chat?
There is a known Teams issue that some people may have. The majority of attendees should be able to see the chat box, but there is a small random number that can't access the chat, and I've had a look and it's a Teams issue. Just for future reference, if that ever happens, it looks like if you exit the meeting and then re-enter, it seems to correct itself, but it is frustrating.
Okay, I'm seeing a couple of questions coming in here saying, should we respond to our chosen question in the chat? I think absolutely fine to do that, but also it's quite nice sometimes to actually have hands up and get some conversation going. I think we're all getting a bit fed up of looking at screens. So either way, whichever works best, but I was asking that question about whether everyone can access the chat simply so that we don't miss anybody out in case they feel they can't contribute. So, okay, right, we're going to leave people in peace for the next few minutes then.
Will we get back? Get back, Liz? Yeah.
Yes, let's do that.
Just to say, what you've been doing is a little snapshot of the sort of action planning process for the 6 areas that outlined in Scotland. They're doing community wealth building, and a little snapshot really of the kind of inquiry we go about. And I'm keen on hearing your thoughts really, and let's batter through these really. Anybody want to go into the breach with a workforce question and from their perspective, just to say who you are, what your organisation is, and just how your take on the workforce question or questions. Anyone to join? Anyone to kick us off? Go on, somebody be brave and be the first person. Who's going to go for it? Oh, maybe nobody did workforce. No, nobody want to go for it. No. Okay. Right. Does
Neil?
Does anybody want to come in with any other of the pillars, the questions that they looked at and how it related to their organisation? Anybody want to have a go? Good. There is now. That is Peter. Thank you, Peter. You're a good man. And just tell us who you are, Peter, where you're from, and what was the question you particularly asked? You answered.
So I'm Peter. I'm Peter Hayakawa from the University of Edinburgh.
Nice.
And I'm the procurement policy officer. So
nice.
I can talk a bit about what we're doing in procurement. That actually it's kind of relevant to the workforce question. But the questions were, if I recall correctly, you know, do you have a socially responsible or socially, I forget the phrase, procurement embedded. Yeah, and then about the community benefits framework. So the University of Edinburgh has focused on sustainable procurement for about 15 years, particularly fair trade. This is the first Fair Trade Scotland University ethical procurement, ethical supply chains. We have a very large sustainable social responsibility office that we work with. And in the last 5 years or so, since the rules changed, we've worked with the councils and learned from the councils, particularly Edinburgh Council, and worked with Scottish Government on local procurement community benefits framework. So we have a strong community benefits framework, and, and we like to try to link the work engagement with our suppliers with work that students can do, or work with academics, try to link up different agendas, particularly engaging students and academics with suppliers on green development or green innovation, or and particularly in construction, which is such a high impact area, a high spend area. And we spend a lot of money, but we also look at universities and colleges as well as having a lot of untapped potential. And as someone mentioned, a lot of this stuff happens anyway. It's about kind of connecting the dots. So the issues we find with it from a community wealth building perspective is that the elements that we do well are like making those connections, but bringing things out of individual projects and into a shared work stream is very difficult, because most of the work is project based, and in construction, historically, a lot of it's just handed over to the suppliers or put into rigid menus or things like that. A lot of the other things. So one of the things we've started to do is work through the growth deals and the Edinburgh City deal. And one thing we're doing is starting to collect subcontractor data to get kind of a rough estimate of economic impact and work with innovation planning, stuff like that. But it's really not anybody's day job. So it's a very
good,
interesting piece of work and difficult process. But that's us.
Thanks for sharing that, Peter. That's really significant what you say there. And common, the corporate culture, and not just project scaling it. We talk about the upside down T in community wealth building, down and then scale it within an organisation across. So that was really, and of course, universities are key anchors and key to be on this agenda. So thanks for sharing that, Peter. That was really, really smart. Anybody else want to come in with another pillar question that they may have had a go at? Come on, folks. I know it's late. It's been a long session. Come on. Someone. Oh, yes. Another one. I'm posting them, getting them out there. Now, who's that? That is... Who is it? Just unmute. Oh, we have to unmute them. Who is it?
It's Nikki Spence.
Neil, it's Nikki. I'd kept my hand down because I'd contributed last week, but if there's no one else coming forward, I'm happy to be the victim. I mean, the volunteer this time.
I'm happy. Nikki, fire on.
Okay, so I just looked at workforce in terms of the questions around the workforce. So the first one is particularly looking at internal recruitment, and there's this focus on disadvantaged groups. And what I said is where possible. So it's not always possible across the organisation. We have 24 members of staff, and some of the roles are quite specific. So where we've been able to recruit and have that specific focus and target and disadvantaged groups, we've taken on apprentices, but that has its limitations within that. Where we've not been able to recruit, supporting local investment in terms of skills for the future. So looking at student work experience, looking at our Gateway to Engineering programme, things like that, for example. The second aspect in terms of the solid and work progression, again, that maybe relates to the types of roles. So certainly for apprentices, but apprentices in our organisation tend to come in under a business admin generic apprenticeship opportunity, and then look at specialising within that, and that can be quite restrictive. And in terms of the experience that they get, I have to say, quite disappointingly, anyone that's come through my line of work is actually going on to train as an accountant, so I don't really know what that says about me. In terms of diversity, I wasn't quite sure what that was, diversity of skills, protected characteristics, so I wasn't really sure how to answer that question. In terms of the next question that we had was, are dimensions and shape of the wider local labour market understood? I would say yes, where the data allows for this. Yeah. And then finally, is fair work being actioned locally? Yes, that we are trying to influence that. If it's internally, yes. If it's externally, it's around influence. So some of our projects, for example, are very specific in terms of working with local people through supporting families, creating family support workers that are local residents. But I'll leave it at that to allow others a chance to contribute.
Fantastic, excellent. And you know, again, from that, even if you were being part of an action plan process, Nikki, you know, it's like where you can, how could we help you to do more? Would be a question for us all, where you can actually do more. What's not understood about the local labour market? What's the gaps? You know, we try to work on that, yeah. And then also, is fair work being actioned? Well, what do we need to think about in terms of fair work for your organisation? Is there something at a national government policy level we need to bend and flex so it's easier for you to adopt fair work? These sorts of questions are kind of things that flow in terms of actions from that kind of initial action plan and research questions. Thanks to Nikki Murray. Cairngorms, brilliant.
Hi there. Hi, I'm Murray Ferguson from Cairngorms National Park Authority. We cover a big rural area that's got bits of 5 local authorities in it. I suppose I was quite interested in the land and property and the community questions, and the questions about the questions seem to be quite black and white about, are we supporting community use and stewardship? And I think we'd probably benefit from some kind of assessment of, you know, where on a scale of 1 to 10 did you think you were? And I can imagine having a really good discussion with stakeholders about that, which I think would be quite fruitful. I mean, we feel we are trying to help communities do that, but I'm sure we could go further. I'm really appreciative of the overall approach, and I think what, you know, a big part of the management of the national parks about is trying to get people to think beyond the usual silos, and yet we have an economic action plan and we've had a community development strategy because of leader. And this approach is really helping us see all these things together. And I can imagine using it with contacts to look at things in new ways. We're very concerned at the moment about the loss of, leader programs for community development, and very anxious about what's going to happen as a result of all the discussions going on about shared prosperity fund in Scotland and an almighty argument that's going on between Scottish Government and UK Government on these issues. But the overall approach, Neil's fantastic, and very much like to talk further with you about how we can adapt it as we move forward.
Absolutely. Thank you for those nice words, Murray. And you're right. I mean, they're very simplified the questions, make them black and white. There's a bit more subtlety to them. But it's important to note that in community wealth building terms, the Western Isles, but also south of Scotland, and the rural dimensions of community wealth building is very interesting to ourselves and the Scottish Government. I think that's something to watch, and it would be good to follow up with yourself. We've had a conversation with High for sure, but does Cairngorms include Highlands and Islands, or is it more? It's not in that area, is it?
We straddle just about every known boundary to man. So we straddle the High boundary and Scottish Enterprise boundary, and as I say, we straddle bits of 5 local authorities. So I'll chat with you further about that.
Hey, Paul, that makes it easy for you, Murray. I'm conscious of time. Is there anybody else wants to come in very quickly that are really burning to kind of say something about the questions? It's sort of been a bit rushed, but anyone want to come in before we wind up?
There's one, it's kind of a question. It's not framed as necessarily as a question, but there's a comment here you might want to just reflect on, Neil. In the chat box from David Brown, and he's saying, from the social commercial sector, community benefits have helped build relationships between private, social and public sectors, but current competitive procurement processes don't tend to allow early and wide engagement with each other, and more importantly with communities. Do you get any reflections on that?
It's a problem that I'm familiar with, and there's something about the longevity and pipeline of contracts that we need to consider here, and it's up for the public sector in part to think about what is coming up, not just a singular contract, but other contracts that contractors could potentially bid for. It has come up. It's an issue. I think the Scottish Government, we've talked about it in terms of with the Scottish Government. So I'm not promising it would change, but it's a really good point you make. Peter, will you want to come in again there, or was that a historic hand?
Yeah, just on that point, I mean, I'd agree in principle with David, but I think the rules in this case aren't the barrier, it's our incentives. So we actually have a huge amount of leeway in the rules for pre-market engagement. We can engage the market collectively. There's a great example in the Nordic countries of a big buyer program where different Nordic cities are engaging the market and trying to get local markets and trying to incentivize them to develop more green technologies and build the local capacity and things like that. Along a lot of the CWB principles. Actually, it's just our time doesn't work. Our funding incentives don't work. We're still judged on really ultimately how many millions of pounds we save annually. So I think there is actually, we've been starting to talk to our suppliers and talking to them more from a regional perspective. We've been starting to talk to them more instead of on an individual project, but so I'll shut up. But I do think there's room for the rules to change, but I don't think the rules themselves are the barrier. I do think our incentives, if you want to use procurement as a policy tool, the kind of top-down, all-inclusive approach like we've heard from our colleagues in Wigan is really needed. It can't just be done on the fly, or it can't be handed to one person to deal with.
Surely. Thank you for that, Peter.
Okay.
Yeah, Liz, over to you.
Okay. Yeah, we haven't got one. I'm seeing one more. Is that, have we done all of the questions? Because I'm sorry, I can't see who it is, but I've got a 1 in the chat.
I've got Lorraine, I think. Is it Lorraine?
Squeeze in one more just before we finish.
Yeah, surely. Lorraine, is it? Yeah. Lorraine, is it?
Yes, it is. I was on before. I would like to say from a sort of community perspective that as regards likes of city regional deal benefits from vast amount of money being made by the Scottish Government, there has been none actually made available in communities in the Highlands. There has been the odd couple of million here, but out of about 315 million, 90% of it went to Inverness. So what we would require up here is to have more conversations from the bottom up from our communities, so that we're bringing everything upwards. At the moment, everything is forced on us from the top down, and the people's views are just not even listened to. So I'm very much with you that we need a bottom-up approach. We need the local authorities to come and talk to the people, so that we can make use of lots of our local buildings that the town would like to use, communities would like to use, but are being stymied. So we have to have bottom up.
Well said, Thank you. Thanks for that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Wayne. Yeah, I think that, so there's actually not just your comments there, Lynn, but some really good comments coming through in the chat, which obviously we don't have time to kind of go through. But I think, you know, just to rest assured everybody, we will capture all of the information. It doesn't just disappear, and we'll share it. And obviously Neil is working closely with Scottish Government, so you're able to feed in comments from these sessions as well as we move forward. But really just want to say thank you, everybody, for coming along today. We're going to round it off now, just round about 3 o'clock as planned. I think it's been a really, really interesting session. Thanks, Neil. I think you've really, again, reinforced all of the kind of theory and the, you know, the knowledge base that we're needing to understand what community wealth building is all about. But also thank you to Debbie, to Sonia, and to Claire for really bringing it to life this afternoon. I feel that really brought an added dimension. And then we're starting to get more conversations coming through with chat as well, and people sharing links, which is really good, because we want to see that happening. You know, it's you want to have, as much as we can, remotely have conversations around all of this and build on the momentum that we're trying to achieve here. So thank you, everyone. Thanks also, of course, to Elaine and Alison, who've worked very hard in the background, both organising the event and keeping everybody connected, which I know has been a challenge. I can see from some of the comments, a bit of a challenge in terms of Wi-Fi, etc., for some of you coming from remote areas. Can I encourage you all to continue with this? As we said at the beginning, it's part of a series, so we've got 3 more events lined up, and the dates for those are, the third one is the 27th of January, the next one's the 24th of February, and the one after that is the 17th of March, and they're all the same time. Well, sorry, not today, we're a bit earlier, but they're all the same time next year, 2 o'clock until 4 o'clock. So really hope that we'll see you at those, and that you're finding this really helpful and interesting, and please do feedback. You know, if there's anything where you feel we're not touching, or there's anything you want us to add in the mix, you know, we'd really like to get your feedback to help shape those future programmes. So that's it from us for today, folks. Thank you very much again, everyone. Have a very safe but enjoyable Christmas next week, and we really hope to see you again in the new year. Take care now. Bye for now.